for everyone. If someone wants to bring up a specific topic, or if somebody wants to bring up another subject, or ask the previous presenter something, it's the time to do it.
I guess I can ask one question about the measures. The floor concept. I was wondering if we want to. So I was wondering, like, why would it be different from, let's say, if we want to provide a floor and a ceiling, can it not be expressed by like a between clause?
Yeah, sure. It is. I mean, they're all connected. Well, for one thing, if you want to do group by, the floor, if you want to generate, let's say, data grouped by, I don't know, groups of 10 days or whatever, or data grouped by month, you would apply the for function to extract the month from the date and then group by that. Whereas a between clause would allow you to generate, you could put that in your where clause and you could generate, one set of data, but you couldn't generate distinct groups for each month or whatever. So the floor approach is, applying a function to roll up to the right time level. That's more flexible than between. And after the custom time frame work, if Calcite can look at a date and a floor function and convert it to a range that satisfies that. So Calcite is able to go in either direction. But if you're writing SQL, floor is probably more flexible. The other thing about the custom time frame work is if your system supports, let's say, a 15-minute time interval, then you can add that to Calcite's validator, and Calcite will be able to do floor and ceiling and converting to ranges and all that kind of stuff based on your custom time frame. So yeah, the message to you as someone writing SQL is just write it as floor or write it as a range, whichever is easier for you, and Calcite will do the right thing.
Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, the custom timeframes, we've not implemented it yet, but that it should be possible to apply that to materialized views as well. So if you define a materialized view based on, let's say, 3-hour intervals and 15-minute intervals, and someone does a query based on 3-hour intervals, it should be able to figure out that you can satisfy that query with that materialized view.
So yeah, one question for Julian. So one of the benefits of having measures and aggregate into SQL was that it turns into simpler syntax of expressing the same thing, and this also means better performance, as you said, I guess. So all this, for example, you're mentioning the self join. So when you go from SQL and you are using measures, are these going to the optimizations? Are we going to see those optimizations, for instance?
Yeah, we haven't implemented the win magic optimization yet, but we could. I just see this as I can't, we haven't fully decided how this is going to be implemented, but I can see something added to the relational algebra that would be a kind of a generalization of windowed aggregate functions, and therefore potentially a self join could be converted to this thing that is a generalization of a windowed aggregate function. And then the big question is not whether Calcite's optimizer can handle it, but is the engine able to execute these measure calculations, these context-sensitive calculations? So one, for windowed aggregate functions, you can kind of do this. You can basically do a linear scan through the data and then compute totals and be able to do a small amount of backtracking. So when you finish reading a department, you go back to the first employee in the department and you figure out which employees, match the criteria. If you're dealing with measures, then perhaps you might be able to do a similar backtracking calculation. Or perhaps you would do 2 parallel scans. So you're reading the 1994 data at the same time as you're reading the 1995 data, and you're kind of doing kind of a merge. But the other opportunity is what I would call top-down evaluation, which is what the OLAP engines do. Where, and I implemented this in Mondrian, where someone would ask for revenue in 2020, and it would basically keep a hash table of has it computed revenue in 2020, and if it hasn't, then it would go and compute it. So it basically is kind of on-demand computing of these various values. And if the formulas are very complex, on-demand generation is what you want, because you can't look at the formula and predict what values you're going to need before you've executed the query. So that's another evaluation technique that is radically different than the way relational algebra works. And then you've got the third one, which is the process that spreadsheets use to high performance spreadsheets anyway. They use kind of a well, I guess you'd call it an incremental computation model. Is when you change a cell in the spreadsheet, it propagates those changes out to related cells. That's another computation model that, again, could be applied to evaluate, complex multidimensional expressions. The point is, if we can represent it in SQL, then we can choose which evaluation method makes sense for this particular data set, as opposed to the user having to choose by which language they choose. So unifying the language now gives us just more options, as we can implement multiple engines that are suitable for different kinds of expressions.
Thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. Hello, so my name is Askar, and I'm a relative newcomer to Calcite. I got introduced to it like 4 months ago by my senior. It was for a linear generation project. And so far, the biggest problem I've noticed with Calcite is lack of documentation. That for me, in learning Calcite, was the biggest hurdle. So I won't talk about it because I see conundrums in a way from what I've seen from people working on Calcite or whatever. People really knowledgeable about Calcite are the ones who are maybe too busy to write documentation, let's say. They have their own jobs, they're seniors and stuff. And I had a question. I'm myself willing to write some documentation to help newcomers, just like I was a few months ago. The thing is, I don't feel confident enough in my knowledge of the Calcite inner workings or whatever to really write documentation, maybe tutorials or something like this. And I was willing to, I want to ask, how would the model work? That, for example, maybe I wrote something or someone wrote something, and it went through like a review, the same way like a code review, tutorial, or maybe an article or something would go through that same kind of review. Oh, this is wrong, or like fix this, yada yada. What do you think about this? Maybe this process?
That sounds pretty reasonable. There's an old joke that the best way to get an answer to a question on the internet is to post the wrong answer to the question. I mean, if you were to write, let's say, a blog post, and you like how you solve XYZ problem, how you write to use a defined function in Calcite, and let's suppose it's 90% correct and 10% wrong, people will correct you, and so you know, this is another principle of open source, which is release early, release often. Don't wait for it to be perfect before you release it. If there are bugs, people will fix them. So yeah, don't let perfection get in your way. Just write something, and it's okay to be wrong. We're all wrong, right? And you know, the talk from Alessandra and Stamatis, they were talking about probably bugs. They were tripping over bugs that I've created, and it's okay to produce code with bugs because people find them and it gets better. So yeah, don't hold yourself to such a high standard. You don't have to be perfect. We don't really have a good place to put documentation, but I mean, well, probably, you know, under the under the documentation directory, you could write an article. It's like a news article or something, and submit it as a pull request, and people can review it as part of the pull request process. I think that would work well enough. So yeah, just do whatever seems most natural to you. If answering questions on Stack Overflow, by the way, is another great way of answering questions about Calcite. It will be your answer will be found because people who have the problem will do Google searches, and so they will find your work, and you will be, you know, you will get merit. In other words, you will get the respect of the community because people will find your work. So yes, please contribute, and we don't expect perfection. And thank you for being in our community.
Thank you. Oh yeah, regarding the Stack Overflow and etc. Like the one thing that really got me like kind of my feet wet when, you know, when you start on working something new, you have no idea, for example, how this project works. I want to thank Stamatis now that I have the opportunity. Like your talk of like the demo, we just the basic, you know, generating the rel node, validating, parsing, you know, this a few lines was very helpful to me to get the whole thing. And in regards to parsing, learning how the parsing works, I think it was one of your answers, Julian, on Stack Overflow that like led me in the right direction. It was just one simple comment or like one simple talk, and it led me in the right direction. So I want to thank you right now, since I can.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't think I would be able to read the code only and get it on my way. It would be too difficult just by reading the code.
Yeah, I don't spend as much time as I guess I should answering questions on Stack Overflow. In open source, a virtue is laziness. If you step, especially if you're kind of one of the old timers like me, if I speak, then everyone else tends to shut up. And so what I'm trying to do is hang back and basically give permission to new folks like you to speak up. And I don't expect perfection from you because I don't expect perfection from myself either. The best we can do as a community is just to show each other respect. And if someone makes a mistake, don't be mean to them because they were trying to do the right thing. And I hope that's a value that we kind of, you know, have in our community.
Thanks for advice. I actually had like another point like I want to discuss, not sure how feasible it would be, but I want to give the floor to anyone else if someone has a question. for it.
I think you should go ahead. Yeah.
So another like second, like a huge pain point, like for me, like the way I use Calcite, honestly, I never touched the planner part at all, not the execution. It was just like up until the like the logical railroads. That was good enough because it was linear generation. For this kind of purposes, there was no need for physical plans or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yet, because of like all kinds of different databases and stuff, the pain point was the parser. And that's how I became contributor by, I had just one PR, just the convert function. It was a huge pain. We left it for like 2 months. It was like a low priority issue. We said, okay, we'll do it later, until it was like, okay, we have to do it. Otherwise, and the only logical way to do it, well, send a PR. There is no other way to extend it properly without having to fork it and maintain the Calcite yourself, just for a simple change, relatively simple change. So I was wondering, like, are there maybe any solutions where it can be more maybe dynamic parsing, maybe runtime level, which you can modify on runtime? A different kind of approach, let's say.
That part of the process, it might be, you might view it as a bug, we view it as a feature. We would rather that you submit a PR and we review it and push back and say you need to write a test and this is wrong and that's wrong, but eventually it comes in the Calcite code base and it's maintained by Calcite forever, as opposed to you maintaining it in your private branch where in 3 releases we might break it. So it's good. You contributing the convert function is the best thing for everybody. It probably takes longer. It takes much longer for you to get it accepted as a PR than it would be to make it in your own private fork of Calcite or add it as a UDF. But look, if it has ordinary function syntax and it doesn't clash with the name of an existing function, then you probably can make it a UDF.
Yeah.
But if it's one of the core functions, and I know convert is so difficult because convert means a different thing in the SQL standard, a completely different thing in the SQL standard than it does in MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server. So yeah, you did the right thing, and it's not particularly easy, but now everyone that wants to use that, and there are people that want to use that convert function, will be able to use your work. So that's a feature, not a bug. And I hope the PR process wasn't too painful. What was ironic was I think you were implementing this convert function, and then someone else was implementing the other version of the convert function at the same time. And I was really worried that your PR was going to massively conflict with their PR. As it happens, they didn't respond, but it's always funny that you wait 10 years and then 2 buses arrive at the same time. I mean, there's a similar thing that's happened with the safecast function. Mihai was talking about the ability to evaluate divide without generating exceptions. We've not done anything for that for a very long time. And my colleague, Oliver Lee, has been implementing safecast, which is casting a value and not throwing an exception, but returning null. And pretty much to the day, someone else was trying to implement trycast, which is the same functionality, just in that it's the same functionality, but that's what Snowflake calls it. So work seems to have started on these, what I think Mihai called them total functions. So no one has started work on what I guess you'd call safe divide or try divide, but contributions are welcome. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And Mihai's idea, I think, might be useful. I'm not sure how extensively, but the idea of like input dialects, I don't think it's going to be very compatible as it is with the parser and whatnot. But it does seem kind of useful.
Yeah, the biggest problem is we have many different aspects of dialects. So I guess Mihai would call it input dialects and output dialects. We have those concepts, they just have confusing names like lexical convention, conformance. Yes, we have dialects. There's about 3 other things. Well, the library, which is a set of operators for compatibility with MySQL or whatever. It's all in, and then type system, right? BigQuery happens to, a few databases actually happen to refer to a timestamp type as a date time and so forth. And so if you want compatibility with a database, you should use the same type system as that database. So there are many related concepts related to dialects in Calcite. And yes, without any documentation whatsoever. Oh yeah, my last point I wanted to make, Oscar, was in order to understand how to use Calcite, it's useful to ask the developers, people like me, Stamatis, how we approach development tasks in Calcite. And my answer to that question is almost invariably, if I need to implement a feature, I will write a test case and I will run that test case in a debugger and set breakpoints. And therefore I will basically do my design based on where my IDE takes me to. And so that is a good process. It doesn't work too well for the parser because the parser is generated, but you can learn a lot about the code by writing a test case and just setting breakpoints and running that same test case over and over and over again. As you walk through the debugger, it will basically take you on a tour of the code and you will reach all of the pieces of code that are of interest to this, function or whatever it is you're writing. So that is how I would start. It's very difficult to explain Calcite to someone who's not using an IDE.
A question in line with this.
Thanks.
Maybe also in line with what Oscar mentioned. Sometimes I feel I use the debugger a lot, but sometimes I get stuck. It's also difficult to explain the status in which we get stuck in English words in a ticketing system.
Yeah.
I was wondering, in this case, what would be the best way to reach the community, knowing that sometimes it's difficult to express the state in which we are. For instance, I have an open ticket with the cursors. And to see that to traverse the stack and see the state at every step, but it's really difficult to pass a certain point and to really get I guess some mentoring or some shadowing maybe maybe useful in these circumstances.
I mean occasionally, like pair programming might help, but most of us are in different time zones and so forth. So the bug system, Jira, is really useful. If you have identified something which is a feature and you can express its requirements, and therefore we can, or if you've encountered a bug and you can explain it from a high level, then we can all collaborate asynchronously and come up with a design, think through the problem from a high level. Sometimes, the debugger is not helping you because you're seeing it from a low level, and that it's a problem you need to solve at a high level. It's a problem that's better solved away from the code, because thinking about the way things should be as opposed to the way they are. So if you can express the problem as a Jira case, either as a bug or a feature request, then we can have we can do high level design, and that's something that you can do pretty effectively over Jira asynchronously, or an email list discussion. Some engineers are better at that than others, but I think it's a quality of good engineers that they're able to have those high level discussions. And if we have them in an open forum, which Jira and the dev list are, then other people in the future can see those design discussions and hopefully learn something from them. And yeah, maybe if your bug, you can convert it into a test case, then someone else can, reproduce that bug and run through the cursor logic in their IDE and kind of get to the same point that you got stuck at. So that, test cases are useful for that because it allows people to reproduce your debugging environment. I will say cursors are, I'm sure they're broken. They've not had much love over the last few years. So I'm sure there's problems in them. Are there any more questions? I will say, Alessandro and Stamatis, what you were saying in your talk, it made an awful lot of sense. Alessandro's observation that you find the first bad relational expression, you find its ID, and then you work backwards to its ancestors. What created that bad relational expression and what created that bad relational expression? That is absolutely the process that I use. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I am able to do that in the debugger. Sometimes I just generate huge log files and just use search for that ID, the first occurrence of that ID. And then there have been times when I wished that I had a text editor that's able to handle files, gigabyte text files, because sometimes that's the process that you need in order to debug a complicated planning process. Yeah, someone wants to write a text editor that can handle text files that are larger than main memory. That would be an interesting project. I don't think anyone, Les does a pretty good job, but it would be really cool if there was such an editor that can handle ultra large text files.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I was going to mention that I generally use less, but yeah, text editor would be like a bit more ergonomic, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah, the point is that we said that maybe it's worth doing a presentation like, okay, let's say pretty basic, but the thing is that we get many people over time that get into that the planner is hanging. I don't have a response to the query. What can I do? And they come to the dev list or other places. And actually, I mean, yeah, they don't even know that the logs exist and how to use them. So having a thing that, like, these are common things. It's not the first time that happened. And this is how you go for it.
You should give this talk every year. I mean, I think every year there's a new bunch of people using Calcite that just need to know about these techniques. And by the way, if people haven't looked at the tutorial that Stamatis and I gave, and Stamatis authored most of it, I give him most of the credit. We gave a talk almost 2 years ago in Copenhagen. It's 90 minutes long. It is an excellent introduction to Calcite. If there are people in your organization that need to learn Calcite, it's the best possible way to spend 90 minutes. You will learn everything, not everything. You'll learn most of the things you need to know in that 90 minutes. And you can find it on YouTube very easily.
So I guess we are almost at the 3 hours. Yeah, if there are no more questions or topics for discussion, we can close this up. What do you think?
I think we're done. I thank you for organizing. Let's do it again. Maybe in 3 months, maybe one of these per quarter would be good, a good tempo. And
Actually,
hopefully-
yeah, last thing before we close is that we have been discussing with a few people about holding an in-person event somewhere in Bay Area. But yeah, so this is actually we are thinking to do it January. Then we were already on March something. So we said like, okay, let's start with virtual, and we figure out the details because yeah, I mean it's good to have a virtual event, but I think would be even better to have it in person, and people would be certainly more freely to discuss with each other than have also the fear of the recording.
Yeah. Although the 3 people I have on my screen are all in Europe right now. So, Alessandro, are you in Europe?
Yeah, I'm based in France.
Okay. So yeah, maybe I don't know, somewhere in the east side of France is the geo center of U3. Anyway, if we can find a location for a physical meetup, in the Bay Area, I'd be happy to attend and speak.
Cool. Then yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks a lot for the presentations.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Take care.